Beginning in November 2017, Colorado election law requires counties to conduct a new type of post-election audit called a risk limiting audit, or RLA. In July 2018, the Denver Elections Division performed a risk limiting audit for the primary election. Free and fair elections are the basis of a democratic society. Ensuring that voter choice is properly recorded and upheld is the basis of election confidence and peaceful transfers of power. Thanks to programs like mail-in ballots and Ballot Trace, the Denver Elections Division has garnered national attention.
Idaho, Washington, Wisconsin, Virginia, West Virginia, state of California. Thank you for joining us here today for the second risk limiting audit. We're excited to have you here.
Risk limiting audits are another cutting-edge tool making your elections better, easier, faster, and more secure. A risk-limiting audit uses statistical analysis to allow election officials to review only a few of all ballots cast in an election to double-check outcomes. Risk-limiting audits are now required by the Secretary of State for Colorado elections. These audits use a random number seed and a computer algorithm to select specific random ballots to check against tabulation software results. The benefit of a risk-limiting audit is that only a tiny fraction of ballots must be checked to ensure strong statistical confidence in election outcomes. So only a tiny fraction of work and time compared to traditional methods of a full hand recount of ballots. At Denver Elections Division, the work that makes an audit possible starts with tracking. Selection of random ballots is very important. By selecting random ballots, there is a lower chance that a specific voting precinct or even any specific group of votes will be overrepresented in the audit. In order to select truly random ballots, however, election officials have to be able to find any one ballot from all ballots cast.
30, 62, 74, and that should be it.
Paper ballots are imprinted with a specific identifier number. This number is used later to ensure that an electronic record of the ballot matches the physical paper ballot. Once ballots have been imprinted, they are organized into batches. These batches are in turn housed in ballot transfer cases, these boxes here. Careful record keeping and security procedures such as keycard entry and 24/7 recordings help ensure that any one ballot is trackable and all ballots are secure. The ballots from each batch are then scanned through vote tabulation scanners. For the 2018 primary election, Denver Elections Division scanned 146,401 ballots on 12 tabulation scanners.
So we have just a short demonstration for everybody today. Basically, we've left one batch uncounted, so you guys can kind of see the process of scanning into one batch. It's pretty simple. Typically, the workers would get the boxes off the shelf, bring it over to their station, open it up, break the seal, and then pull out the ballot batch. They would make note of the system will tell them what ballot batch number we're on. They would indicate that on the batch folder so that it can be tracked all the way through the system. Remove the ballots, place them in the scanner. Scan.
Including boxing, checking batch sizes, and reboxing and labeling ballots, Election officials worked at a rate of about 2,500 ballots per hour per scanner.
All right, and then I'll check. The batch size is 116. I expected 116, so everything went through good. So at that point, I accept the batch. Am I sure? Yes, I'm sure. And that batch is now submitted.
Most of the time, tabulation scanners can read voter marks to determine votes cast. Sometimes, improperly filled out ballots must be adjudicated, a process in which election workers review ballots and judge voter intention. Elections officials set the requirements for adjudication based on a percentage of the filled vote circle. For this election, officials instructed the software to flag ballots with 3 to 35% of a vote circle filled. This range means officials don't waste time on completely blank votes, but do judge smaller marks or partially filled out votes.
This is adjudication, so this is the first ballot that was queued into the system.
To that, so that's a mark, and they're deciding that yes, that is a mark that can be counted as a vote, and so he is marking, he's checking it, right?
And you can see the flag at the top
in
here.
accordance with a bipartisan team, so the bipartisan team is saying yes, that should get credit, and then that's telling the system that ballot, on that ballot, that person should get credit. So it's adjusting what the original count was to give that person or that candidate credit.
Once the scanners have tabulated ballots and all questionable ballots have been adjudicated, election officials export the cast vote record. This is an electronic report of the final vote tallies. Before the cast vote record is sent to the Colorado Secretary of State, it is hashed. Hashing is a cryptographic method of ensuring that transmitted information remains secure by representing large amounts of data as much smaller numeric values. Users select a specific key. When complex information like the cast vote record is interpreted by the specific key, it results in a hash, a long string of letters and numbers specific to that particular data. The receiving party interprets the transmitted cast vote record with the same key and checks to make sure the hashes match. Even small changes in the information to be hashed results in a different hash value, so checking hash values from the original file and the received file ensures that the received results match the cast vote record created by Denver Elections. With the results of the election in hand, a risk-limiting audit can begin. The risk limit set ahead of time by the Secretary of State is the risk that a wrong outcome, like the wrong person being declared a winner, would not trigger a full hand recount. So a 5% risk limit would mean that 95% of the time in which a wrong winner was declared, the audit would catch the mistake and trigger a full hand recount. Several factors affect how many ballots must be checked in the audit to achieve that 95% risk limit, from how many ballots were cast to the margin of victory in any one race.
Loras County Clerk and Recorder Republican.
Yep.
Douglas Governor Dem.
Yep.
For the 2018 primary, Denver Elections risk-limiting audit required checking 222 ballots in the first round, just 0.15% of the total votes cast. Thanks to probability and statistical math, examining this tiny fraction of votes cast has a 95% likelihood of catching problems with the election's outcome, and requires only a fraction of the time and cost of a full recount.
The purpose for all of this is so that voters can have trust. So we begin the drawing of names. Dwight. Who was first?
Maurice Turner.
It's a very complicated process, Maurice. You come up, you draw a die, and you roll it, preferably on the table. All right, here we go. 8. All right, didn't screw it up.
Colorado is the first state in the nation to perform rigorous, risk-limiting audits on elections. Although a number of states require election results auditing, many specify only a small flat percentage to check. or use methods that are too slow to be enacted before official results are declared.
Jenny, you're with?
Polk County, Florida, and U.S. Vote Foundation.
On the bunker side. 5.
Beginning in the general election of 2018, Colorado will perform risk-limiting audits in all counties that are able to export a cast vote record and are not hand-counting ballots. 59 out of 64 counties in the state.
I'm Monterey County elections. Apparently they can't play track.
So you might have to have more trips to Vegas.
I might.
This statistically rigorous method of auditing is also supported by transparency. The Secretary of State makes publicly available not only the results, but the process of a risk-limiting audit, from open source software to a public meeting to determine the audit random number seed. That random number seed was entered into a computer algorithm, which created a list of specific ballots.
Right, let's rock and roll. So, as I said this morning, I went
8, 5, 7, 7, 5, 2, 1, 2.
Under Election Rule 25.2.2, Colorado's Secretary of State must publish audit random number seeds, allowing outside observers and interested members of the public to check the seed and the location of selected ballots through the open source software.
So it's all available for you to see and verify. And that's really the whole purpose of this, is so that people can have confidence their vote was counted, it was counted correctly. And ultimately, I believe that inspires people to vote.
With the list of randomly selected ballots, Denver Elections Division gets to work. Among the entire collection of ballots, elections officials must locate and retrieve the exact ballots that were selected at random by the Secretary of State's audit software. The Elections Division's earlier record-keeping work makes this possible, but still requires locating and pulling many ballot transfer cases to find the 222 ballots needed for the first round of the audit. Each of these ballot transfer cases has been tracked, logged, and secured throughout the entire election process, with seals and double-check signatures providing an extra check on each ballot transfer case. The required number of ballots pulled for an audit is based on the risk limit set, the total number of votes, and the margin of victory. Smaller margins of victory require more, sometimes many more votes to check. The margin of victory is the difference in quantity of votes for one side versus the other. Comparing two groups of anything, whether it's money, apples, or votes, is pretty easy to do if you have a large quantity in one group and a much smaller quantity in the other. Even if you make a couple of mistakes counting, the big difference means you can still be very confident that the big group is bigger. If your two groups are closer to the same size, there is less difference between them. It requires more investigation to know which group is actually larger. For a risk-limiting audit, a higher margin of victory means a bigger difference between the groups of votes, so fewer votes need to be checked to be confident in the outcome, which means fewer ballots need to be pulled by Denver elections. In addition to finding the ballots, elections officials print the previously saved image file of each selected ballot onto goldenrod sheets to act as placeholders in the batches. Officials reopen the sealed ballot transfer cases, find the appropriate ballot batch, and double-check the selected ballot against the printed image. If the imprinted number matches, officials know they have properly tracked the correct ballot. The goldenrod ballot image is put in the spot of the original ballot to make the return process faster and provide a second check to ensure the right ballot is in the right spot. If a second round of auditing is required, the goldenrod shows the audit board that the ballot it represents was pulled for a prior round. If the imprinted number matches, officials know they have properly tracked the correct ballot. In a recorded meeting with outside observers, each physical ballot is hand-checked by the audit board, which is made up of one Republican and one Democrat. This bipartisan configuration helps avoid bias when judging any particular race. For each ballot and each actual vote, a board member must decide the voter's intention. The audit board judges only the original ballot in order to ensure that the original voter marks are being judged. If there is a consensus between the board members on the vote, that vote is entered into the risk-limiting audit software. If the board can't agree, no consensus is selected in the software, which may count against the risk limit of the audit. The audit software checks the board members' review decisions against the cast vote record from the tabulation scanners and any earlier adjudication. If the votes entered into the software are the same as the votes recorded by the tabulation scanners, the audit will be successful. In the case of discrepancies, the audit software checks how the new information would have changed the race outcome. If the audit board's vote interpretation increases the margin of victory, the math underlying a risk-limiting audit will likely not trigger further investigation. This is because the outcome will still be correct. If it lowers the margin of victory, the audit might require a second round of ballots to be checked. For example, let's say candidate A ran against candidate B for local office. The original election results were that candidate A received 55 votes and candidate B received 45 votes. During the risk-limiting audit, the audit board finds a ballot that was counted toward candidate B's total, but they judge should properly have been counted toward candidate A. That changes candidate A's margin of victory, but it doesn't change the election outcome. If the audit board found the opposite case, that a vote counted for candidate A should have gone to candidate B, that indicates a different margin of victory. In this case, although the election outcome remains the same, the margin of victory has narrowed, which means the audit might require reviewing more ballots to achieve the same level of statistical confidence in the outcome, especially if any other discrepancies occur. The statistical math of a risk-limiting audit is much more complex than this simplified example. Depending on the total number of votes cast and the margin of victory, discrepancies between the audit board's judgments and the official cast vote record might require pulling a much larger number of ballots than in the first round. Further discrepancies could require a third round of auditing, and so on, up to and including a full hand recount of every ballot. Audit board members judge each ballot separately based on the original marks made by voters. By judging the original ballots rather than the stored digital image files or the goldenrod printed images, the audit board avoids judging any digital artifacting or other problems that potentially could have occurred in a machine tabulation system. Using the actual ballot allows the board to judge voter intent without any interference or influence. After the first round of the 2018 primary election audit, Denver's Elections Division recorded 0 discrepancies between the audit board's reporting and the original cast vote record, a perfect score. Find out more about risk limiting audits and other ways Denver Elections Division ensures fair and free elections at denvervotes.org.